everyone, Sandy Norris. I am the team leader for a group of accounting professionals. We call ourselves Covenant Outsourced Accountants. We are ready to serve your church plant with outsourced accounting. I'll give you more information about that at the end of my presentation. For now, I want to focus on the information and overview of what you will receive in your financial reports each month and a little bit about how to interpret that. First, understand that there are three primary financial reports: a balance sheet, an income and expense report, and a budget report. The balance sheet tells you on a particular day what you have and what you owe, how much cash is in the bank, the value of your building and equipment. If you owe money to a credit card company, for instance, or when the time comes that you have a mortgage, this information is on the balance sheet as of a particular day. It's a snapshot for that day. It's kind of like looking at a map app and putting a pin in the place where you are. This is where you are on this day at this time. An income and expense report tells you a little bit, briefly, how you got to that place where you are. It summarizes the income and the expense over a period of time. It's kind of like when you look at the map of your most recent run or bike ride. And the budget is a plan for where you're going next, how you are going to get where you want to go. It's like when you put an address, a destination address in your GPS and click the directions button, and it gives you a map of how to get there. So let's take an even deeper look at some specific information. This is Covenant Church balance sheet on March 31st, 2020. On March 31st, they had about $32,000. They had a building and some equipment that was worth about $1.2 million. They owed a little bit, not very much. They had a mortgage of $315,000. So they had a total equity of $915,000. Another way to think about equity is if Covenant Church had to close on March 31st, if they got exactly $1.2 million for their building and paid off their creditors, there would be $915,000 left. A note that if equity ever goes negative, that means the church is bankrupt. So this is where they were on March 31st, 2021. How did they get there? Here's an income and expense report. This particular version shows what happened alongside the plan. So you have the actual activity columns for the last month and the fiscal year to date, alongside budget for the last month, budget year to date, and the annual budget. The dated columns on the report show what happened over that period of time. Now you can choose any period of time for an income and expense report, or as it's called here, an operating report. Months and fiscal years are the most popular, most common. A fiscal year, by the way, is just the financial year. If this were a tax-paying corporation, the IRS would be very interested in knowing what your fiscal year is, and you would not be able to change it without some significant effort. So have that in mind as you are talking about a fiscal year. This particular report is reporting what happened for the month of March and what happened July 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021. Let's look even closer. During March, Covenant Church had $12,407,000 of offerings and a little bit of other income. So a total income of $12,507. Their expenses fall into 5 broad categories. Ministry expenses are what I consider the things that the church does within the church. This is the work of forming disciples, building community, worshiping God, things like that. Then there are mission partnerships. This is what the church is doing beyond itself. This is supporting the denomination and conference, supporting missionaries, being a meaningful partnering in the community. There are administrative expenses, the kinds of things that are required just to operate and function. Personnel and facility expenses are pretty self-explanatory. Their total expenses for March were $9,660. When I subtract that $660 from the income of $12,500, they had a surplus of $2,846 in March. Year to date, their surplus, or more income than expense, was almost $27,000. Now let's look at the same information year to date. Their year to date income is $110,000 compared to their year to date budget of $86,400. They're doing better than budget on their income. Their expenses year to date are $83,668. This is how we arrive at the $26,805 surplus year to date. Compared to the budgeted, they had planned that at this point in the year they would have a deficit, more expense than income, of $3,706. So that's a brief overview of the route they've taken so far on the map on this fiscal year. So how can they know what to expect next? What's the path ahead? That's what the budget is for. At the beginning of the year, the church membership approved a budget of $115,200 for income. They approved expenses of $120,000. So they must have known they had at least $5,000 in the bank at the beginning of the year to be able to cover this planned deficit. In comparing the year-to-date middle column with the annual budget column, we can have some idea of what's coming next. There's probably $16,000 more of expenses coming this year. When we look at income, there's only $5,000 left to go to meet their annual budget. When you read the budget closely, it's able to give you navigational directions for how to reach the destination you set at the beginning of the year. As I'm doing this evaluation between actual and budget, I generally look at the third and fourth columns, the year-to-date numbers compared to year-to-date budget. If there's anything really out of whack here, anything where there's a significant difference between actual and budget, that's something to look more deeply into to see if there's a course correction that needs to be made on that particular line. This church is doing pretty well. Things are going well financially. They're bringing in more than they expected. They're accomplishing the ministry that they intended to with less than they thought that it would take. But sometimes it doesn't go that way. What if the church were only bringing in about $9,000 of offerings each month so that their offering, their income total is less than budget by $3,000 or more by this time of the year? As I scan down this report with the actual year-to-date compared to budget, I can see that there are several expenses that have overspent, and maybe I need to make a course correction on my worship ministry or my children's ministry, which has already overspent the full year budget by several $100s. Administrative expenses are also over budget. Look at insurance expense. The premium must have been more than we anticipated. We can't change what the insurance premium is going to be, so we're going to have to make that edit someplace else. We're going to have to not spend something that we thought we would. And when I look at total expenses, it's $89,000. I've budgeted $90,000. Why can't I spend this last $1,000? Because we haven't had enough income. Right now, this church is sitting at a deficit of $5,641 compared to the planned deficit of $3,706. Not only that, when I look at the balance sheet, they have less than $2,500 in the bank. They're building a balance on their credit card, which means they're going to end up paying interest. This is getting to be a pretty serious situation for this church now. Not only do they need to tighten their belt on spending, but they need to do some work on building generosity within their congregation. Realize that's not a fun topic to preach about, but it is part of discipleship, and I would encourage you to preach generosity to your congregation. So there you have it. 3 financial reports, the balance sheet that tells you where you are, income and expense report that tells you how you got there, the budget that tells you where you're going next. Each one giving a little bit different information, but each one important in its own way. So let's shift gears now for just a couple of minutes and talk about some financial information that you'll find in your covenant agreement. The covenant agreement is a 3-way agreement, reinforcing the ethos that we wish to cultivate in the denomination of being 3 strands strong. You've probably heard that at other times in your training. The image of the braided 3-strand rope being stronger than a single strand is what we're going for. And as in any partnership, it's not a one-way relationship. You don't just get to take from the denomination and conference. We want you to give back, to participate fully in the life of the conference and the denomination. Part of that is by contributing 6.5% of your tithes and offerings to the denomination and 3.5% to the conference that you are a part of. Together, that's about 10%. That is 10%, not about 10%, it is 10%. And just a note that as you are calculating that amount, you don't need to include raised funds. So if you have partner churches that are supporting you or individuals that are supporting your church, individuals outside of your congregation that are supporting you financially, you don't need to include that in the 10% calculation. Your covenant agreement also includes information about your beginning compensation package, health and life insurance, pension, retirement contribution, and make a note that the 12.5% retirement contribution is a requirement for all credentialed clergy in the covenant church. This is not an individual expense. This is something that your church needs to pay on your behalf. And finally, in the benchmark section of your covenant agreement, you'll find some benchmarks for attendance, for participation, for financial sustainability. The expectation is that at the end of year 3, when the financial support from the denomination and conference come to an end, your church will be able to sustain itself internally with its own money. Its own members will be able to sustain the church. So by the end of year 1, we hope that 1/3 of the income or 1/3 of the expenses are being covered by offerings of the congregation. By the end of year 2, 2/3 of the expenses are being covered by your tithes and offerings. And at the end of year 3, 100% of your expenses are being covered by offerings. At the beginning of my presentation, I talked a bit about the outsourced accountants and the work that we want to do. Here's a flyer that you are welcome to take a look at and review. This service is provided to each church plant as you begin and start out, and then you will have the option of continuing the service after the covenant agreement period is over. We make use of shared drives and shared files so that we can receive information from you, and then we put that into an accounting system and push out some reports to you so you can be making good decisions, so you can see where you are, so you can see how you got there and where you are going next. Thank you for your attention, and God bless you as you plant your churches, and we look forward to serving you.